Since I don't have much time to talk about other things, I'll start out. You know, I am a Holocaust survivor, and I come to you from an era in history where civilization lost its humanity, its heart. A time when there were only three kinds of people in this world. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. The rest of the world, they just stood by. They didn't care what's happening in Europe to the Jewish people. It didn't matter to them, apparently not. And so Hitler had carte blanche, and he just kept on doing whatever he felt he wanted to do with the Jewish people. And in the process, he killed 6 million of us, men, women, and 1.5 million of whom were children. Imagine. And the whole world was silent. No one spoke up. So, being a survivor, I feel I have an obligation to do what I'm doing, travel around the world, talk about it, keep reminding people. And I gave you those little pins. Each one of you received on the chair a little pin. That pin says Zachor. That's a Hebrew word which it means remember. Remember specifically the Holocaust. And I don't expect you to wear it, but even if you put it in the drawer or in a jewelry box, and someday you'll have children of your own, and if they find it, they'll say, "Mommy or Daddy, what is this strange looking pin?" There your answer is going to be, "Oh, that means remember the Holocaust. There was such a thing as a Holocaust." And this is what I'm trying to get across. And I founded a foundation called Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation for that purpose, to make sure the world does not acquire amnesia. And one way of doing it is starting this pin. And every time a listener to my message, to my story, or a listener from any other survivor, I make sure that he gives out, or I give out, little pins. And to date we have given out over 500,000 pins. So this is what I can contribute to continue the memory. And of course my story is very important, and I wish I had enough time to tell you everything, but we'll just go over it slightly. The picture that you see is my family. Let me take this off. Oh, okay. My mother, my little brother, this the same little brother before he had, this one was after he had his haircut. My sister Goldie, my brother Morris, my father Lazar. None of these people survived. Everyone that you see in the picture was slaughtered. And I come from a family of 7. Only 2 of us survived. Myself and my sister Lola. My sister Lola, she was not in the concentration camp like I was, but she was hiding in Budapest, and she went through an awful lot. And she happened to be a wonderful artist, and you're going to see some of her pictures from memories that she remembered seeing about the Holocaust. They're not pleasant pictures, but that's what she did in 1950. She did those paintings, 1949 or 50. So you'll experience them. So we lived in Krakau, Poland, and this is the buildings that we lived in. In fact, this little picture here, the window at the bottom was my bedroom picture. And The Nazis marched in one morning and they occupied the city. There was no fighting. But on the 5th day after occupation, we found out what Nazism, what it really meant. And I'll tell you the story, what happened. Early in the morning, a truck pulled up to the gate, and they started to bang on the gate, and the super came running to open the gate early in the morning. He says, what's going on? What's going on? All they wanted to know where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige, and he told them that one family, the Lessers, us, lived on this side, and there was another family on the other side of the gate, a Jewish family. So they came running in with sacks in their hand, and they were pistol whipping everybody. We were still in bed. At 5 a.m. in the morning, they pistol whipped us and they were screaming, all your valuables, throw in all your valuables in those sacks. Gold, silver, money, jewelry, furs, anything of value. They kept throwing everything in, and they tore off my mother's chains that she had and her ring. They pulled off my sister's, and they threw it all in there. While this was going on, there was a commotion at our neighbor's apartment across the way, and we heard terrible screaming. And a young family lived there who had 2 daughters. The daughters were about my age approximately. After school we would play in the yard. But the mother had a little infant boy 2 months earlier. And with all the commotion, the baby woke up and was screaming. So when we heard the scream, my sister Lola and I ran out through the back door, through the yard, to the kitchen, into their apartment. And this is what we saw. We saw this monster was holding the baby by its legs and swinging it and yelling to the parents, make him shut up. The baby was crying. So the mother and the daughters and the father were all screaming, our baby, don't hurt our baby, our baby. But this man, with a smirk on his face I've never seen, he was enjoying it. He smashed this baby's head into the doorpost, killing it instantly. And he enjoyed it. Can you imagine the parents and all of us jumped on this monster? Of course, we were pistol whipped by his bodies, and then they picked up all the stuff, they gathered all the jewelry and stuff, they threw it in the trunk, and one of them says, come on Hans, let's go. Time to leave, and they left. This was our first taste, only the 5th day after occupation of Poland. And the new ordinances started to coming in. Jews had to wear Star of David, and you couldn't work here, you couldn't travel, you had to have a new ID. The ID had a big J in it, in red, Jewish for Jewish, on the ID. Things got worse and worse. Then a new ordinance came that you had to leave town. If you wanted to stay in Krakau, you had to go into a ghetto. They made a ghetto, a very worst part of the city, near the railroad tracks. And you probably all know what the ghetto was like. It was impossible living in one of those. My father's business was wine and syrup. He had a factory. He would make wine and syrup. And he also had a chocolate factory. He was first in Poland to manufacture chocolate-covered wafers, like Kit Kat. I don't know if you heard about that, but in those days they had it in the shape of animals with tin foil on it. I remember when my father would come home, us kids will always search his pockets for candy. It was But these businesses were taken away. One day he went to the business and there were guards stationed and they just had confiscated. I'm sorry. Forgive me, I don't know exactly where to read. And I forget myself. This is the best way, right? Right now?
A little further away, yeah.
Okay. Everything was taken away and we were told to leave Krakau. We had a chance to go into a ghetto and stay in Krakau or leave, and we decided to leave. So we went to a small community called Januar, and there, it's a whole story. My father's business was confiscated. He had no more money, and the little money that he had was always taken away. So he came to a new town, and we had 7 people, family of 7 to feed, and he had no money. So my future brother-in-law went ahead and brought him a sack full of flour, 100 pounds of flour, figuring he can bake bread because they had a baking oven in that house where we lived and the farm. My father, instead of baking bread, started to bake pretzels. Why pretzels? All you need for pretzels was flour, water, and salt. And those ingredients he had. So he made the pretzels, then he took it to the neighboring bars, taverns, and he would sell them there. It was a novelty, and this is how he started to make enough money to bake some breads for the family. Anyway, he became a little baker. He never baked before, but he became a little baker out of necessity. It didn't last long. My sister Lola got married. In fact, we have a picture of her wedding guest in our yard there, and Michael, her husband, and Lola, and my mother, my little brother next to my mother, and I am there number 3, the one with the handkerchief, number 3. Both of us have a handkerchief in the pocket. So anyway, the strange thing is, out of all these people that you see there, the only survivors were 3 of us. My sister Lola and her husband and myself. Everyone else in that picture was slaughtered. They were all killed. After my sister got married, and she moved in to a duplex, and the other half of the duplex was a mayor of that town. And one day the mayor tells Michael and Lola, I heard there is going to be a raid against the Jewish people. Save yourselves. So he gave him a hint, and that night my brother-in-law hired a driver with a wagon, a horse and buggy, and in the middle of the night, the whole family, just whatever we can carry, we snuck out of our houses, apartments, and we went into that wagon. The only place we can go is a town called Bochnia, a mid-sized city. And Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside a ghetto. But Bochnia ghetto had very bad name because people always were telling everybody, stay away from Bochnia ghetto. Why? Every once in a while, 3 or 4 trucks, dump trucks, would come into the ghetto in the middle of the night, and they would go from house and apartment, from house to house, and pull out the children from their beds and throw them into the dump truck. Well, you can imagine the parents screaming for the children screaming for the parents, and those cultured, educated people would fill out these trucks and start to move out of the ghetto. And the parents were running after the trucks and screaming for their children. They had machine guns at the end of the truck, and they would mow down the parents running behind it in front of their children. No one ever heard from those kids anymore. But this resonated all over Europe, and everybody knew, stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of this. We had no choice, and it's a good thing that we left, because that night there was a raid. Late at night there was a raid, and they picked up thousands of Jewish people all over the town. They knew exactly who lives where, and they picked everybody up, put them in trucks, and they took them to the forest. After the war, we found out what happened to them. There were some farmers who were going early in the morning to the forest to pick mushrooms to sell in the market, or berries and to sell it. So they witnessed, they were hiding behind trees. They witnessed that all these people were lined up and shot, thousands of them. They were all shot, and they all fell into these big ditches. And I guess they were telling us that for days on end, the ground kept moving because they didn't care if they killed you or wounded you. If you fell in, they buried you. And this was Bochnia. I mean, Niepolomice, that little town. Now we were in Bochnia, so we were glad we went out of there. And in Bochnia, what we went through is too much to tell. It would take me an hour, what we went through in ghettos. Living condition in a ghetto was awful. One little room had the rooms that I was in with my mother and my little brother. Just for the three of us in that room, there were an additional 8 or 9 people, so we were about 11 or 12 people in that room. And it was unbelievable. They had a little table, and they had boxes for chair, they had a little stove, and they had a beautiful armoire, which was out of place because it was a nice piece of furniture. And I didn't pay attention to it. We slept on straw, and on top of the straw was blankets, and between families there were just sheets hanging, separating families. You can just imagine the living conditions, how it was. And everyone had to work. If you didn't work, you didn't get any rations. My job was I worked into a uniform factory, putting on buttons on uniforms. You had to work. But one day, one of the Jewish policemen inside the ghetto, they had policemen, they called them capos. Those policemen didn't have weapons, but they kept order inside the ghetto. And this friendly policeman told us that there is going to be a raid tonight, you better hide or something. Usually when they would come in with the trucks, they would go on loudspeakers and they would tell everybody to get into these trucks. And if anyone doesn't go into the truck, and if they hide, they're found hiding, they will get shot immediately. So a lot of people went in these trucks. We don't know where they took them. They said they're taking them for labor, but it wasn't always true. So many people were hiding. And since those raids at night with the children and the dump trucks, every apartment and every house had a hiding place. Our hiding place, I found out, was that armoire where you hang your clothing, your coats and jackets. You open the door, you push the clothing aside, the back panel would slide apart, and there was a hole in the wall. And 12 of us could crawl onto the other side of the building, and you stood between 2 buildings. Luckily, the outside of the buildings were closed in. They were continuous, but the only opening was the sky. It was winter, it was snowing, and we stood there all night shivering, and we heard shootings dogs barking. And anyway, things were unbelievable. But towards morning it got quiet, so we went out. And when we went out, what we saw is unbelievable. People dead, laying on the ground. Some women and their babies, holding their babies. Some people were torn apart by dogs. And there were people going around with push carts and picking up these bodies and pieces of bodies, putting it on push carts, taking it to the ghetto square, piling them up, and the Nazis would then come with gasoline cans and threw gasoline over it, and they lit a bonfire, a human bonfire in the middle of the ghetto. That was going on. But I knew that my sister Lola and her husband, they were hiding someplace else with his family. So I went over there. They were hiding in a doghouse. You remove the floor from the doghouse, there was a stepladder, and there was room for 7 people could hide, and they would have provisions and bedding, everything for 7 people. And as Lola is telling now the story, as she was about to go in, another Jewish policeman with his mother and his sister come by, and he says, I know about your hiding place in that doghouse. Unless you take my mother and my sister along, I'm going to tell the authorities. Well, they had no choice. So Lola and Michael, her husband, walked away. Now they had room for 7, but not for 9. So the 2 of them walked away. And they were walking the street when a friendly couple, somebody they knew, Capo was a policeman, a Jewish policeman inside the ghetto. They called them capos. So this other capo comes by, and he says, where are you two going? Don't you know what's about to happen? So Lola tells him the story about this other policeman, what he did. So he says, don't worry, we have a place for you. Where my sister and her 2 children are hiding, there's room for you, follow me. And he took him to a leather factory. Above the leather factory they had a tank, a water tank. And he says, my sister and her 2 children are inside. All you have to do is climb up the ladder, lower yourself with a rope, and which they did. And when they came in, they saw his sister is knee-deep in water, and the little girl to her waist in water, freezing cold. And the mother was holding this infant baby who was sleeping, and Michael, of course, picked up the little girl. My sister picked up the infant, and all night long they heard that screaming and yelling. Anyway, the next morning it was clear, and they went out. The first thing Lola wanted to go was to the doghouse where Michael's family was. And they came, and this is what they found. Everybody was shot with a bullet in the middle of the head. And they were laying there. And of course, in the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 24 hours. So Michael went out and he found a wheelbarrow. He put his family on the wheelbarrow. He took them to the cemetery, and they found a shovel, and Lola, with her bare hands, they dug up a grave for the family. I could keep on talking about the ghetto, but we don't have enough time, so I'm going to skip it. I'll just tell you this. We had a chance, and we did escape the ghetto. It cost a lot of money, and somehow we were able to escape. My brother-in-law found a driver truck driver who was hauling coal. So he asked, could you please make a double-decker so the coal would be on top, and between the coal and the chassis, people could hide, which is what we did. And this is how I was able, with my little brother, to escape to Czechoslovakia. He took us to the border, and there was a smuggler waiting for us to smuggle us across. My sister Lola and her husband, they were also able to do it. But when my mother and father were following on the third trip, a farmer, nearby farmer, saw something going on, and they called the Gestapo. And they came and they pulled everybody out of the truck. They lined them up and everyone was shot. All 10 people who were hiding, plus the driver who wasn't even Jewish, all 11 people were killed at that time. Anyway, we arrived, to speed it up a little bit, we came into Czechoslovakia. From there we had to cross the border into Hungary. What we went through is, I don't have enough time to tell you, but on the other side, and we came to Budapest. In Budapest we found my sister Lola and Michael, because they went before us, and we were there, and they had a nice meal waiting for us, a warm bed. Next morning we had to leave to a little town called Munkács. Munkács was a town where my mother was born there, and my sister Lola was born there too. My mother's side of the family comes from Munkács. My father's side of the family comes from Krakau. And of course my mother moved to Krakau after she married my father. So we lived in Krakau, but in the summer we would go every summer to Hungary, or it used to be Czechoslovakia then, in that little town Munkáczewo, and a wonderful city. And there was, I had my uncles there, my cousins, and they all waited for us at the train as we arrived. And once we got there, I couldn't believe what I saw. People were going to proms, weddings, things were normal. Like nothing ever happened. I haven't seen those things in years. So I tell him, you know, what's happening in Poland. Most of them didn't believe, but those who did believe simply said, well, this will never happen in Hungary because Hungary is an ally of Germany, so we have nothing to worry about. About 3 or 4 months later, that was in March of 1944, the Nazis just marched right into Hungary like they were invited guests. And it's strange, when they came, they knew every Jewish person, their name, their addresses, their occupation, the whole history about every Jewish people in the country of Hungary. The question is, in 1944, March of 1944, Hitler knew he was losing the war. Why would he occupy a friendly country, Hungary, who was an ally, and siphon off the soldiers from the front to occupy Hungary? It didn't make sense. 850,000 Jewish inhabitants. That's what mattered to Hitler. At that point, for Hitler, killing Jews and pilfering their wealth was more important than winning the war, obviously. And within 4 weeks, they were already shipping people to the death camps. Now this is what they told us. They simply told us, you're going to be relocated to Germany. Germany needs workers because the men are all fighting on the front. So able-bodied men and women will be working. Children will be going to school. Older people will be cared for. bring along all your valuables, but leave everything else behind. And anyone found hiding will be shot. Anyone found hiding will be shot. So, everyone started to march, and they marched us into a brick factory. Why a brick factory? Because that's where they had railroad tracks, and they had cattle cars waiting for us. They lined us up, 80 to a cattle car, and they ordered us to go in. Now, 80 in the cattle car was very tight. It wouldn't be so bad, but everyone had a bundle or valises. They all brought their valuables with them. So it got so tight that if somebody wanted to sit down, someone else had to stand up. Imagine 80 people, women, children, infants, some women were pregnant, older people were sick. We had no choice. We were pushed in. They had 2 buckets in the corner with water. After the water was gone, there was no sanitary facilities. They didn't have a toilet. So they used those buckets, and those buckets were filled up. Day 2, day 3, and it was slushing all over the ground. Now we were happy we can sit on top of these bundles. The 3rd night, we arrived at a place called, we saw a sign, Oświęcim. Oświęcim was Polish for Auschwitz. But it didn't stop there. It continued 3 kilometers, and then it stopped. And we see barracks, and we see a sign, Arbeit macht frei, Auschwitz. But we didn't know of an Auschwitz. We never heard of it. This was news to us. But we felt, well, this is a labor camp. Look, the barracks, this is probably where we will be working. So,
more this way also.
I know, I can't.
Can we bring the cord up now for you?
Okay, all right. I got face to say a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so now the train continued moving. Instead of opening up the gates, the doors, and letting us out, they didn't. And they're moving it for another 3 kilometers. And then they opened it up in the middle of the night. This was Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Birkenau was the place where they did all the killing and the gassing, and all of this was going on in Birkenau. We didn't know this. And they tell us to women and children to the right, and man to the left, and they order us to get out, and they say, leave all your bundles and belongings where it is. Don't touch anything. So I'm holding on to my sister Goldie, my little brother Tully, and we are just being pulled apart, never to see each other again. This was the end. In a strange place, it was nighttime, we see these chimneys with flames are shooting out from the chimneys, smoke, and there's ashes falling all over the place. Every time we made a step, just like in snow, we left a footprint in the ashes. Strange smell. And I see a man like a doctor with a white frock, and he's going like this with his arms. Right, left, right, left. We didn't know, but then we found out this was Dr. Mengele. He was considered the angel of death. He decided with a flick of his finger who shall live, who shall die. But no one knew what that means. So he asked a man in front of me, a young man, he asked him, kannst du laufen 5 kilometers? Can you run 5 kilometers? Or would you rather go by truck? This man said, well, he had a knee problem, he would rather go by truck. Is there a problem? Okay, giving me a little space. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, he would rather go by truck. The poor soul didn't realize it meant certain death. But something didn't seem right. When I arrived there, I was 15 and a half, and I figured to myself, why would he ask such a question? You were already here, I can see barracks. Why would he ask to run 5 kilometers? I figured he's testing us to see whether we're strong enough to work. So I tell my uncle, my cousin, I says, whatever he asks you, tell him you're strong. You can run, you can work, you're healthy. But let me go first. And I was 15 and a half years old at the time. But I figured I have to lie to make myself older if I can run and work. So I walked over to this doctor, I tiptoed, and I saluted him, and I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. Then he asked me, kannst du 5 Kilometer laufen? And I run 5 kilometers. I said, jawohl. And he sent me to the left. My uncle and followed. And we're now walking to these places and we see the smoke and the smell. So the men in front of us are saying, those must be smelting factories. This is probably where we will be working. Who knew? No one expected to know what this was. We found out later, they took us into a big room and they told us to get undressed, get out of your clothes, and go into that shower to take a shower. And after the shower, they gave us the striped clothes, and we had to, and they also gave me a sign, a little wooden tag on a string. My number was 41212. That was my number. They didn't tattoo us because we were slated to be shipped out to a labor camp. And besides, when the Hungarian people came in, most of the time they didn't have time for doing this because they were coming in by the loads, the trains were coming in one after another. So they took us now to the barracks, and they walk us out, go to the barracks. And when we arrive to a barrack, the barrack Älteste, the Stubenälteste, comes out. The Stubenälteste comes out and he counts us. And then he talks to us in a broken German. And I could tell that he is from Poland, a Polish man. And he was Stubenälteste, and he's telling us, "Ha! You Hungarian Jews, you think you're here on a vacation? Think again. You see those chimneys and those ashes? Those are your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, and your sisters. And if you don't behave and don't do exactly what you're told, this is how you're going to wind up, ashes." First, I couldn't believe it. This is the 20th century, and these cultured Germans are burning people, my sister, my little brother, ashes. He's pulling our leg. This couldn't be possible. And he orders us to go in the barrack and pick a bunk. They had 3-layer bunks. We took a layer on top. And my cousin, my uncle, and I lay down and we fell asleep immediately. In the middle of my sleep, my cousins wake me up. He says, "Ben, get up, get up." I says, "What's going on?" He says, "Listen." And I hear a humming or a singing or a crying. I didn't know what it was, a strange sound. And he says, "Look, one side of the barrack, there were boards missing from the wall. You can see an orange hue, like a flame." So I figured to myself, I speak Polish, And the Stubmeltest is a Polish man, obviously. I went to him and I asked him a question. What do I hear? What's all that orange hue? So he tells me, "Ha! You Hungarian Jews, you know nothing." They were expecting the influx of the Hungarian Jews coming in so fast and furious into Auschwitz that they didn't have time. They enlarged the gas chambers, they enlarged the crematoriums, and they had us dig ditches for the fire, to burn the bodies. So I was quite surprised to hear that, and I says, "Well, what is that sound?" He says, "Jechi, infants and children, they couldn't be bothered with them." So he started to tell me it takes a half an hour to kill a person in a gas chamber. But they couldn't wait that long because there were new transport trains coming in fast and furious. So the Nazis would look through the glass window, and if they saw everybody was on the ground, whether they were alive or dead, they had the Sonderkommando go in and take them out, cut their hair, pull out their gold teeth, and check their orifices in the whole body to see if they're hiding anything. And then they would take him to the crematorium on little gurneys, or since they didn't have time for that, they would simply put him in dump trucks, fill up a dump truck, and take him to these fire pits that they prepared for the Hungarian Jews and dump him in there. I says, "Well, what is that sound that I hear?" He says, "Children, they couldn't be bothered with them. They have no hair, they have no gold teeth. They put live children on top of these half-life, half-dead people, and they're dumping him into these fiery pits." This is what they did with the Hungarian Jews. I just couldn't believe it. How is that possible? But we found out it's truth. This is what's happening. All that smoke and ashes is our dear loved ones are being burned. It didn't take long, and they took me to a labor camp. They took us to a labor camp, and I worked in a rock quarry, and as they dynamited the mountain and big boulders would come down, it was our job with sledgehammers to break him up to small pieces and throw it into mining carts, run it down the hill to a grinding machine where they made gravel out of it, and then push those mining carts back up the hill. It was very difficult labor. Anyway, but after we finished working, they lined us up and they took us into our camp in the evening, and they line us up again and they count us, and they dismiss us, they gave us our ration, and then we can go in and take a shower, go to sleep. One night they wouldn't let it, they lined us up in the camp and they counted and they counted and they counted, and they wouldn't let us go. And the commandant comes down with a Fräulein on his side, and he says to us, "I'm going to show these Schweinhund a lesson they'll never forget." What happened? 3 of the inmates escaped. And because of this, he orders every 10th person in line to be pulled out and to receive 25 lashes. So my uncle was in front of me, and I'm behind, his son was behind me. And when they're pulling out every 10th person, I can see that my uncle's going to be a number 10. So I push him behind me, and I took his place, and I became a number 10. They took all of us number 10s into the middle of the yard, and they brought down bundles with hardwood stakes, 1 by 1 inch, about 2.5 to 3 feet long, hardwood. And they also brought down a sawhorse. That's a sawhorse. Excuse me. And this is what he orders us to do. Tiptoe, put your knee inside the opening of the sawhorse, bend over, but your body cannot touch the wood. One man was pulling your trousers real tight and the other one was doing the hitting, and you had to do your own counting. If you miscounted, you start from 1 again. If your heel touches the ground, you start from 1 again. If any part of your body touches the 2x4 on top, you start from 1 again. And I was number 4. There were 3 people in front of me. The first one, he miscounted. And every time they hit him, you can see a line of blood coming right through the trousers. They hit you so hard, and those stakes were so sharp, hardwood stakes. It cut right through your flesh. And this man was miscounting. Finally, he fell down. He falls down. The commandant goes over to him. He kicks him in the face. Get up. He couldn't. He pulls out a revolver and he shoots him. His Fräulein goes over and gives him a hug and a kiss like he just performed a heroic act. Number 2 came up. He too couldn't make it, and he was shot. Number 3 was a younger man, and after a while he screamed out, he says, "Please have mercy on me. Do not kill me." So he says to him, "Then get up and come over and face me." The poor guy stands up, he makes 3 steps, and his knees just gave out from under him, and he fell. He goes over, shoots him. They take 3 bodies away. I am number 4. One thing I can tell you, I psyched myself out, and I walked up and I tiptoed and I put my knee inside. I bent over without touching, and I thought to myself, Ben, this is it. You want to see another day? You have to do it exactly the way he told you. And one man is pulling my trousers and the other one is hitting, and I count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20. Finally, I got up to 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I made it. You could hear a pin drop in the whole camp because no one believed that anyone could survive that. The man who was holding my trousers tells me in Yiddish, he says, "Go over and thank him." So I stand up and I go over to the commandant and I salute and I say, "Dankeschön, Herr Kommandant." When he heard that, he put his arm on my neck here, shoulder, and turns me around facing those number 10s who are still beaten. And I was thinking to myself, what now? Is he going to kill me for making it? No, he used me as an example. He says, "Now I told you it could be done. If you do it like this, Julia, you have nothing to worry about." While this is going on, there's a commotion at the gate. They caught those 3 inmates who escaped, and they're pulling them in. Bloody, you couldn't recognize any of them. When the commandant saw that, he lost interest in us number 10s. Just like a child gets sick of a toy, he just told us to go back in our line. And he orders his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows, and we had to stand there and watch as they hung every one of them, one by one. And afterwards, it was weeks I couldn't lay on my back because of the welts that I had, and unbelievable. But after a while, we heard cannon fire in the middle of the night, like the front is closing in. So that morning, my uncle was working in the kitchen as a cook, but his son, my cousin, and I came down to go to work, and there's a loudspeaker saying the camp is being evacuated. No one is going to work today. They lined us up in rows of fives, and they started to march us out. That was called the Death March. Why did they call it the Death March? Because if you could not keep up pace with the soldiers, you were simply shot. And all day long you can hear pop, 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 people being shot who were falling behind. 1 week, 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, my cousin gets sick on me. He says, Ben, let me sit down in the snow. Everyone will pass. They'll shoot me. It'll be over with. I said, no. We will survive. Don't even think of this. We will survive this, and things will look up. You are not going to do this. And I dragged him along for another week. He was hanging on my arm for another week, and we arrived to Buchenwald. When we came to Buchenwald, they told us to go into this barrack and we can shower. They'll give us fresh clothes. But next morning, at 8 a.m. we have to be back on the same spot because Buchenwald is also being evacuated. The front was closing in from all sides. Yeah. They found a picture in a bad house. I don't know if you can make this out, but this face happened to be me in a bad house with a lot of other inmates. And that could have only been taken in Buchenwald that night. And I don't know who took it, but somehow they found this picture. It's very hard to see, sweetheart. Anyway, you're now on our way, and they march us out from Buchenwald, and we see a bunch of cattle cars waiting for us. And they line us up, 82 cattle car, and I tell my cousin, please, how much time do I still have?
I have 15 minutes.
Okay. I tell my cousin to please go inside, I'll push you up, but go near the wall so that you can rest your back against the wall. I remember going in the cattle cars to Auschwitz, I was in the middle, people all around me. It was terrible. So I please asked him, and I pushed him up, and I followed, and sure enough, he had a nice spot near the wall. After everyone got in, they closed the gate. About an hour later, they opened up the gate, and they threw in 80 breads, 80 loaves of breads, a loaf of bread for each person. Now, if you can picture this, those people who were next to the door were grabbing 4 or 5 breads. And I and my cousin were at the wall, at the end of the cattle car. He had nothing. And we don't know where we're going, for how long. So I started to climb. My cousin was too sick. But I started to climb over the sitting inmates on their heads to get to the door, see if I can wrestle out the bread from somebody who had 3 or 4 breads. While I was climbing, somebody had a pocket knife and he stabs me. And I feel a stab, and I feel my mouth is full of blood, but I couldn't stop. I had to get a bread. So I continued, and finally one man was holding 4 or 5 breads. I pulled out one bread and he punches me. I put that bread in my back pocket, and I go back to my cousin. He says, "What's happening to you, Ben? You're bleeding." I put my finger here, went right through my tongue. I had a big gash, and to this day, I still have a mark here. But now it's over my chin bone because I filled up. I was very skinny then. It was in the middle of my throat. Anyway, we arrived into 1 week, 2 weeks. Everybody's dying in that train. We called it a death train. Everyone you looked is dying. I had enough sense that I took that one bread in the middle of the night. Nobody should see me. And I rationed, giving my cousin a piece the size of a half a Maggie. And I would have that same piece. The bread lasted us for 2 weeks. But can you imagine how hungry and starved we were? And I had bread in my back pocket, and I had enough willpower not to touch it. All around us, people are dying. On the 3rd week, we came to a place we didn't know. It was Dachau. And they tell us all who can walk out of the kettle car. From our kettle car, out of 80, maybe 4 or 5 of us walked out. And we walked into the camp. Inside the camp, we see a mountain full of dead bodies just piled up. It was in front of the crematorium. I understand that they ran out of coal, so they just piled up these bodies. And they, right next to the crematorium, they had a barrack. They pushed us in there. And they didn't give us a bunk to sleep on, just on the floor, my cousin and I on the floor. Some people gave us a little coffee, ersatz coffee or soup, a little bit to keep us alive. Anyway, 1 day, 2 days, on the 3rd day I heard, Befreiung, liberation, Americans. We couldn't believe it. So I take my cousin under my arm and we walk into the yard. You see these soldiers were crawling, the inmates were crawling on their hands and knees to kiss the boots of an American GI soldier who liberated them. And I was in the middle of the yard with my cousin. 2 American soldiers walk up to us and they hand us a can of Spam. They opened it up and it smelled so good. We made a mistake, we ate some of it. We were so hungry. All of us who ate it came down with dysentery. My cousin dies in my arms the night after liberation. He died. And when they came to take him away, I tried to follow him, but my knees gave up from under me and I fell. When I fell, they pushed me to the side. A day later, somebody walks over to me with a nice suit. He introduces himself in Polish. He says that he is a Jesuit priest, and he will pick me up and take me to the infirmary. He came with some nuns and doctors and nurses, and they are opening up an infirmary in the camp in the yard of Dachau. He's going to take me to the camp. So he picks me up and puts me on his shoulder and he carries me. He told me something I'll never forget. He says to me, Benek, you paid a terrible price for being born Jewish. All you people paid a terrible price. But don't you ever forget your noble religion. To hear that in 1945 from a Jesuit priest was very unusual. You may hear it today from a priest, but not in those days. I never forgot it. And he took me inside the infirmary And nun came over, they put me on a cot, and she took my vitals, and then she gave me some kind of an injection. All I know is I fell asleep. 2.5 months later, I woke up in St. Tertullian. St. Tertullian, it's a monastery. I'm sure most of you know where St. Tertullian is, a beautiful place. And this is where I came back to life. And my story continues from that point on. But I thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, by all means ask me now. I missed a lot of my story, but I think you have a pretty good idea, a pretty good overview. If you really want to know everything that I went through, I strongly suggest you get my book. And it's called Living a Life That Matters, From Nazi Nightmare to American Dream. It tells the story just in the title. And it's a very interesting book, and many schools in the United States teach out of it. It's not in the curriculum, but they teach out of it simply because they read it. Every answer that you're looking for about the Holocaust, any questions that you might have, the answer is in that book. Everything. I made sure for that. Any questions? Nobody has a question. I gave a book for the library. There's only one book. I'm sorry, because on the plane you couldn't take much. But you can get my book even on the e-book. And most of you read it on e-book, and it's very cheap. I made sure that the e-book is so cheap that no child could say that, oh, I couldn't afford the book. It's less than $4, $3 and change. So every child can afford it. And I strongly recommend it, not because I wrote it, but after you read it, you'll know the reason why I'm recommending it.
I shout out.
All right. I started this Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, which is the pin that I gave you. We do a lot of things. We train teachers how to, after we are gone, how they can teach about the Holocaust. We send people to the March of the Living. Many of the youngsters would ask me a question, what can I, as an individual, do to make a difference in this world? So I started part of my foundation on the website, a place where I said you can shout out, you can let your voice be heard, go viral. This is something you can do, because in World War II, while all these people, our Jewish people, were being slaughtered, no one said a word. You have a choice. You can go viral. And when you can call, you can go say you're against anti-Semitism, you're against whatever you pick. There's a whole list of this you can pick. You're for freedom, you're against hatred. Anything you call out and you shout out, so that shout out is going to remain there for generations. And your great-grandchildren someday will be able to punch in your name and your shout out will come out. You know, it's mostly shouting out for tolerance, for love instead of hate. But remember one important thing I want you to remember. Love and hate, they're both contagious. So choose love. And before I say goodbye, if nobody else has any questions, any other questions at all, do me a favor and hold hands. Everybody, hold hands. first thing I want you to know is when you go home this evening, hug and kiss your parents and your siblings. Do not take them for granted. That's all you have is your family. Appreciate them while they're here. Now that you're holding your hand, repeat after me 3 times loud. Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. It's so important. You're all graduating soon, and you're going to go on to your own little life. It's so important that you remember to stay. You're the last generation to listen to a life survivor. How important is that? You can tell your great-grandchildren that there was such a thing as a Holocaust. And we have to, and we have to, you know, when you bully someone, bullying has a big part to do. I think Hitler was a big bully. And so were all the Nazis. Now imagine, if you bully someone, you make an enemy for life. Is this what you want to do? Have an enemy, someone who's going to hate you for the rest of your life? And this is how it begins. Remember, the Nazis and Hitler did not start with killing. It all started with hate. Hate, propaganda, and this is how it began. So when you bully someone, that's an addition of hate. And somebody's going to hate you for the rest of your life. Don't do that. Don't do that. Bullying is the worst thing you can do. And unfortunately, there's an epidemic now in the world for bullying. Remember, this is the advice I give you. See if you can bully. You can stop bullying. Every time I talk in a school, the next year I call up that teacher and I ask if anyone in the class ever was a bully. Well, you know what they tell me? Mr. Lesser, are you kidding me? They're the best behaved children they've ever experienced. Not only don't they bully, but they go around to see what they can do to help. If anyone needs help, they're there, they want to help. And this is what it should be. It's beautiful. You're also beautiful young men and young ladies. Why hate each other? Why bully each other? Become friends, camaraderie, really friends forever. Couldn't that be beautiful? And someday you'll appreciate it.
We're all different, and that's what makes us.
Yeah. Well, but
What'd you say about us? They're being all different. Everybody's different, and we should learn from our differences.
because, you know, it's a strange thing. So every person has their own belief. Their own belief. And why can't we just live side by side and appreciate our differences instead of hating them? One person may be Jewish, the other one is Christian, the other one is Muslim. What's the difference? You appreciate their differences and learn something from them. But you can live side by side. You don't have to hate each other because that other person believes differently than you. God gave us all a free will and a free mind. So we are allowed. Imagine Hitler, I don't know if you can hear me. But Hitler wanted an Übermenschen. Übermenschen, he was looking for Nordic type, and he didn't even qualify. The blue eyes, and the blonde hair, and everyone should be Aryan, and everyone had to be a Nazi. Yeah.
Have you ever been to Poland and to Hungary, presenting and telling your story, and how did the people react to it?
Good question. No, I have not been to Poland or Hungary telling my story. I have been there after the war, but not to tell my story. I went there for the March of the Living with youngsters, with 200 youngsters in 2010. I went to the March of the Living, which we take them to these camps and tell the stories, what happened in all these places, so the kids could know. But no, I didn't. Well, but it's so important. I'm talking about Hitler, how he wanted to make these Übermenschen. Imagine if everybody looked the same, and everyone was thinking Nazism, only one thing. What kind of a world would it be? It would be a world like we would be a bunch of ants following a leader. The beauty in this world is that we are different. We look different, and we think differently. That's what makes it beautiful. But share your differences and appreciate your differences instead of hating them. Any other questions? No. How much time do I have? This is it?
It's time is over.
Time is over. Thank you again for listening to me.